Hey folks, so today I'm going to answer a question from Scripted Alchemy. I'm not sure what that person, Zach Jackson, there we go. I just downloaded their page, I think. Let me delete that. Where'd that go? Weird. Okay, so yeah, so Zach asked me this on Twitter a while back. The question was, so they actually gave me this code sandbox. Something I've always wondered, yet rarely seen, is there anything wrong with destructuring custom React components? Someone asked me this and I didn't want to assume. And so this is what they mean. That destructuring right there, we have this property on here that we're binding to this. And so we can call it, however we want, like this. So why is this not a pattern that this Zach sees is the question. So first off, there's just to clear up some misconception. This is not a React component. This is a function that returns JSX, but the way that it's being used is it's just being called. It's not actually being rendered. Now, one thing you could do is say react.create element. And that actually works pretty much exactly the same, but you're actually creating an instance of that something. And this only works because the something is being defined only one time for the component. It wouldn't work if you were to put the definition of something inside of the render method. Well, it would work, but it would not be a good thing because then you're creating a new component and rendering that, and that's going to cause it to unmount and remount over and over every single time it renders. So just to clear that up, this is not a component. This is a function that returns JSX, and it works fine, but it won't appear in the render tree. It won't have its own life cycle, stuff like that. So why is this not a more common pattern is the question. And specifically not just JSX, but also ES6 classes. Why don't people destructure things off of this? Let me just make sure I'm not missing anything else. Yeah, okay, so I'll just address the ES6 thing first. I do that pretty, sometimes. I don't really use classes, though, for anything other than React. And so, yeah, and when we get hooks, I probably won't ever use classes ever. And if you're wondering why, I don't know if I've ever answered that on my AMA, so you can ask me there, and maybe we can talk about that another time. So, yeah, what are the problems that I have with this? Well, here, let me fork this really quick so I can make some edits, get rid of that thing. We'll slide this over so I get a little more editor room and bump up the font size a bit. Okay, so I'm going to refactor a couple of things first because I don't like this noise of the constructor. So we're going to say this is an arrow function, so it's already bound, and we can get rid of all that nastiness. And then I'm just going to simplify things even further. Well, no, we'll just leave this as it is. Okay, so this is totally possible, and I've actually seen this a lot. Not the destructuring piece here, but I haven't seen that a whole lot, but I've done it before, and it's not entirely a bad thing. I'll do that not normally in the render method because I don't follow this pattern, and I'll explain why in a second. But I've done it in methods before, and it works fine. I don't really care. You can use that. But I wanted to talk about this idea of putting functions that return JSX as members of your class. I think that's a mistake, and here's why. So I feel like it's an unnecessary abstraction that pulls my pieces of my render method out into a bunch of different functions. That means that I have to go around and search around the class to find all of the code that's necessary for my render method. Now, you might argue, well, it can be nice to take here a chunk of JSX that looks a lot like another. Let's just parameterize it, put it in a function, and we're good to go. But one of the problems that I have is when typically these are going to get to be pretty long. You'll have here. We'll just do this really quick to simulate a longer render method. So you'll have like a bunch of things in here, and then you'll have one place where it says this dot props dot whatever, which of course will be undefined. So you'll have a couple of places throughout this thing that are using this, and I don't really like that a whole lot. When like what you're trying to accomplish is you're trying to say, okay, we're going to take this block of code so that it's reusable, and we're going to stick it into a class method so that we can see exactly like and parameterize the things that are different, so we can more easily see that, oh, these things are the same with just these differences. But then you actually, with all functions, you have a mysterious extra parameter called this, which is not passed, but is implicitly given based off of the how that function is called. And I just really don't like this. I have a whole blog post actually. Let's see, classes. I think that might be the short URL. Yeah, kcd.im/classes. It's called Classes Complexity and Functional Programming, where I describe my problems with this. I really don't like this as like at all. Period. There are situations where classes are a good solution. You're making like a million instances of this thing or whatever. But typical use cases in JavaScript programming, there are no performance gains of using this over closures and objects, and those are like way simpler. So what I would recommend instead, if you do have 2 blocks of code in your render method, here we'll simulate that idea. You have 2 blocks of code in your render method. You want to, why is that not, there we go. You want to parameterize those and share them. Just make a function component. Okay, so then we do function something, and then we'll just return all this stuff. And just bump that down, like magic. And then you can just use something, and you can see everything that you could pass to this thing. Now we're going to get a big error because this .props doesn't exist, which is great because now we can pass whatever here, and we'll just use whatever. And then here we can say whatever is this .props whatever. And it's much more explicit where things are coming from. I much prefer this over class methods. I think that's a mistake. I see it a lot. People will like take this block of JSX from their render method, stick it in a method. I don't think that's the right way to go. If you really want to reuse stuff, just make another component, render that component. And I think that's the right way to go. So let me just check out really quick what comments people have, and then I'm going to wrap this up. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on designing and structuring forms that use Excel type tables as inputs with column level input validation functions. Sorry, Sean. I will need a lot more time to devote to answering that question, and I'm not going to have the time to do that. David Adams, I've done this whenever I have forms that show different sets of inputs based on selections for organizational readability's sake. Yep, David, so go ahead and just take that, make a component out of it, and then you solve a bunch of problems, make things more explicit. Yeah, you do. I should mention, you do have to type more characters for doing stuff like this, but I think that the explicitness is worth it. Code is read 90% more frequently, or I don't know, 90 times more than it is actually written, and so focus on readability. Yeah. So Kuya, yeah, sorry. To me, this was looking like Elm kind of approach for building, if I'm not wrong. I haven't built anything with Elm. So yeah, Tony says, great recommendation. Hooray. I agree with this, even though the projects I work on don't tend to follow it. That's the life, King Daro. All right. Does anyone write React apps using Angular style guide? I've never heard of anybody doing that. There are some good things from the Angular style guide. I contributed to that. But yeah, there's as far as I know, there's no React style guide. There probably is. There's probably like 50 of them. But I don't know. When hooks come around, everything's gonna change anyway. It's gonna be great. And Andrew started using downshift. Woo! Okay, cool. I'm gonna jump out. This was fun. Oh, hey, cool. And by the way, now that we're in this situation, we can say function app. And we don't even need to use a class at all, which is one of my favorite things ever about hooks. I love hooks. Oh, boo. Except, there we go. Get rid of that. And then we'd say props. Yay. But of course, any app that needs to be like actually usable, you'll probably need state and stuff. So then you'll need to use a class until hooks come around, which should be very soon. Karen is asking, when is hooks coming? Karan, sorry, or Karen. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, but hooks should be soon. There is React timeline, or there's a React blog. Roadmap, that's what it is. So suspense for code splitting is shipped. You can use that today. Actually, at PayPal, I updated the sample app, which is, we've got this sample app that, and then this tool where if you want to create a new app, you go to this tool and it will basically make a copy of that sample app. So everybody who makes new apps at PayPal makes an app based on the sample app. It's like our boilerplate. And I just updated it to use PayPal scripts. Hooray! And the app uses React. Hooray! And it's using suspense for code splitting. Hooray! So it's cool. And then we'll get a minor release for React hooks in Q1 of 2019. So sometime maybe March or maybe sooner. I hope sooner. I feel really confident about React hooks though. So I mean, you didn't hear this from me, but if you wanted to start, like if you were gonna wait, or if you're building something new and you're not going to ship until like March timeframe, then if it were me, I'd use hooks. I'm actually going to be using hooks in kentcdodds.com in my rewrite for sure. Because yeah, I mean, they're changing and things. Like I said, huge disclaimer, please don't tell Dan that I told you to use hooks, but I think they're pretty stable. Concurrent mode, that is not stable. Do not use that, but that is coming in Q2, and then suspense for data fetching, also very unstable, mid-2019. So fun stuff, fun stuff. Okay. Okay, so David Adams said, I think it's hard to do if the form is really complex and inputs require values from other inputs. Gets to where you're forced to pass a ton of props to these child components. David, that's when you use the context API. So you have your main form component, create a context that has all the state that you need to share with all the children, and a mechanism for updating that state. And then all of the children, you just render these children out, they grab that state from the context, and happy things happen. This will be even easier when we have hooks and you can just use the use context hook. I think explicit is more valuable than like a giant thing with a bunch of methods. That just feels hard to me, but you do you. Okay, how do you keep your CSS and JS components organized? Do you co-locate them with your components? So yeah, I do. I don't have an example. Actually, typically what I'm going to do is for my Refactor React course on Egghead, it's actually called Simplify React Apps with React Hooks, which has a sweet rating of 4.7. What? So in here, I've got an app. Let me just go over here. Available on GitHub. So this is the React GitHub profile, and you can actually go to it on Netlify. I'll just paste this here really quick, and it totally works. You can log in with GitHub, and then you can do somebody's username, and it'll load the data and all that stuff. So in here, I am using CSS and JS. If we look at user components, here we've got profile. Here I'm using emotion, and I'm actually using the JSX pragma. This is actually a Create React app, but yeah, I'm using emotions JSX thing, and the reason that I'm doing that, oh yikes, is because it allows me to do this, CSS equals. And that's kind of like the style prop, except it allows you to do a lot more things and it composes nicely. So this text is actually an emotion component, emotion styled component. And then I pass CSS and it'll merge that CSS with the CSS that the text is creating. And it's really nice. Then, yeah, doing the same thing for this section thing, for this div. I like to create some like base components that are like my component library, and then use the CSS prop for all the one-off stuff. I typically don't make a styled component for one-off things. I don't like naming things. I think it's useless to name stuff. Like, what would I call this? Centered section. I feel like I communicate just as much with this as I would with the name centered section. In fact, it would be even harder to know exactly what that section is doing. So yeah, I vastly prefer the CSS prop. The difference that the CSS prop has over the style prop is it allows you to do hover states and media queries and all of that magic stuff, access the theme, all of that stuff. So that is that. You can only do that with this little doodad at the top. Maybe I'll do a video about that sometime. I think actually I have. If you go to KCD dev tips and check out the CSS prop, it might be a little bit dated, but the same concept applies. CSS. I thought I did. Maybe I'll do another video of this. CSS. Oh, yeah, there it was. Prop. Yeah. Emotion CSS prop without the Babel plugin. So, yeah, let me just check out anything else that people are asking. For props, I like to explicitly don't destructure the variable so you know the data is coming from above. I actually really like destructuring props. I'm not sure if this is what you're saying, but I will pretty much always destructure my props at the top. The reason is that I can look at the top of the function and know exactly what props this thing accepts rather than searching around in my render method or in the JSX define props dot everywhere to know what the props are. In addition, now I'm starting to use TypeScript more, and that's even better. So, hooks are the best. Tony is asking if I'm using Gatsby for my new site. Yes, I absolutely am, and I'm loving it. Best thing to use for global state management for a React app. So I've got a blog post about this, of course. It's application state management. There it is. And I'll give you a link to that. And this is where I basically say don't use Redux until you really know you need it. Start with component state, then use a JavaScript module singleton if you can manage it, and then context. And I say stick with context for as long as you possibly can. It's going to get even better with hooks, just so much easier. There are problems with context, especially with regard to using context for an entire, for your entire application state, but I kind of recommend that you don't put a whole lot of state in there anyway. Like application level state, global state, really only applies to stuff that really is actually global. There are like sections of your app that need different things, use different context for those things. Unstated can kind of help you bring order to that, and I kind of like unstated, but I would stick with the context API as long as you can. Redux is way overused. Okay. So let me just see. We've got a lot of questions today. It's kind of fun. Why emotion over styled components? I had a tweet that I linked to a while back that showed it. But the short answer is emotion is more capable, faster, smaller. And so I like emotion. Oh, yes. And you can use the Babel preset now. Julian is saying and has linked to it, which is great, except you can't use the Babel preset in Create React App. So you still have to use the Pragma, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. Yes, David brought up a good point about the tricky thing with context is you never know when you need to use data in different contexts that aren't in the same hierarchy. That is true, but I'm a proponent of pain-driven development where you deal with the problems that you have today. And like that doesn't mean that you ignore the potential problems in the future. You just design things in a way that allows you to change quickly, because the only consistent thing in our industry is change. And so just make sure that you don't lock yourself into a corner, but don't do more work than you have to today. Okay, sweet. I'm gonna jump out, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope that was helpful to you, Zach. I will see you all next week, and yeah, I'm gonna go now. Goodbye.